very near to tears. "I'm not a Bemin." "Go back to town," he ordered. "Tonight bring the book to the town hall and tell the council what happened to it." She swallowed, and said in a faint voice, "Yes, Father." She turned and started slowly back down the hill, not seeing the unicorn as she passed it, the bloody spear trailing disconsolately behind her and her head hanging in shame. He watched her go, and it was safe for him to smile. When night came, and she stood before the council, ashamed to lift her eyes to look at them, he would have to be grim and stern as he told her how she had been trusted and how she had betrayed that trust. But now, as he watched her go down the hill, he could smile with his pride in her and know that his question was answered, that the younger generation had lost neither courage nor loyalty. Julia saved a child's life that spring and almost lost her own. The child was playing under a half-completed canopy when a sudden, violent wind struck it and transformed it into a death trap of crackling, falling timbers. She reached him in time to fling him to safety, but the collapsing roof caught her before she could make her own escape. Her chest and throat were torn by the jagged ends of the broken poles, and for a day and a night her life was a feebly flickering spark. She began to rally on the second night, and on the third morning she was able to speak for the first time, her eyes dark and tortured with fear. "My baby, what did it do to him?" She convalesced slowly, haunted by the fear. Her son was born 5 weeks later, and her fears proved to have been groundless. He was perfectly normal and healthy. And hungry. And her slowly healing breasts would be dry for weeks to come. By a coincidence that had never happened before and could never happen again, there was not a single feeding-time foster mother available for the baby. There were many expectant mothers, but only 3 women had young babies, and each of the 3 had twins to feed. But there was a small supply of frozen goat milk in the ice house, enough to see young Johnny through until it was time for the goat herd to give milk. He would have to live on short rations until then, but it could not be helped. Johnny was a month old when the opportunity came for the men of Ragnarok to have their ultimate ally. The last of the unicorns were going north, and the Prowlers had long since gone. The blue star was lighting the night like a small sun, when the breeze coming through Schroeder's window brought the distant squealing of unicorns. He listened, wondering. It was a sound that did not belong. Everyone was safely in the town, most of them in bed, and there should be nothing outside the stockade for the unicorns to fight. He armed himself with spear and crossbow and went outside. He let himself out through the east gate and went toward the sounds of battle. They grew louder as he approached, more furious, as though the battle was reaching its climax. He crossed the creek and went through the trees beyond. There, in a small clearing no more than half a mile from the town, he came upon the scene. A lone prowler was making a stand against 2 unicorns. 2 other unicorns lay on the ground dead, and behind the prowler was the dark shape of its mate lying lifelessly in the grass. There was blood on the prowler, purple in the blue starlight, and gloating rang in the squeals of the unicorns as they lunged at it. The leaps of the prowler were faltering as it fought them, the last desperate defiance of an animal already dying. He brought up the bow and sent a volley of arrows into the unicorns. Their gloating squeals died, and they fell. The prowler staggered and fell beside them. It was breathing its last when he reached it, but in the way it looked up at him, he had the feeling that it wanted to tell him something, that it was trying hard to live long enough to do so. It died with a strange appeal in its eyes, and not until then did he see the scar on its shoulder, a scar such as might have been made long ago by the rip of a unicorn's horn. It was the prowler he had known 19 years before. The ground was trampled all around by the unicorns, showing that the prowlers had been besieged all day. He went to the other prowler and saw it was a female. Her breasts showed that she had had pups recently, but she had been dead at least 2 days. Her hind legs had been broken sometime that spring, and they were still only half healed, twisted and almost useless. Then that was why the two of them were so far behind the other prowlers. Prowlers, like the wolves, coyotes, and foxes of Earth, mated for life, and the male helped take care of the young. She had been injured somewhere to the south, perhaps in a fight with unicorns, and her mate had stayed with her as she hobbled her slow way along and killed game for her. The pups had been born, and they had had to stop. Then the unicorns had found them, and the female had been too crippled to fight. He looked for the pups, expecting to find them trampled and dead. But they were alive, hidden under the roots of a small tree near their mother. Prowler pups, alive! They were very young, small and blind and helpless. He picked them up, and his elation drained away as he looked at them. They made little sounds of hunger, almost inaudible, and they moved feebly, trying to find their mother's breasts, and already so weak that they could not lift their heads. Small chunks of fresh meat had been left beside the pups, and he thought of what the prowler's emotions must have been as his mate lay dead on the ground, and he carried meat to their young, knowing they were too small to eat it, but helpless to do anything else for them. And he knew why there had been the appeal in the eyes of the prowler as it died, and what it had tried to tell him. Save them, as you once saved me. He carried the pups back past the prowler and looked down at it in passing. "I'll do my best," he said. When he reached the house, he laid the pups on his bed and built a fire. There was no milk to give them. The goats would not have young for at least another 2 weeks. But perhaps they could eat a soup of some kind. He put water on to boil and began shredding meat to make them a rich broth. One of them was a male, the other a female, and if he could save them, they would fight beside the men of Ragnarok when the Gurns came. He thought of what he would name them as he worked. He would name the female Segin, after Loki's faithful wife, who went with him when the gods condemned him to Hel, the Teutonic underworld. And he would name the male Fenrir, after the monster wolf who would fight beside Loki when Loki led the forces of Hel in the final battle on the day of Ragnarok. But when the broth was prepared and cooled enough, the pups could not eat it. He tried making it weaker, tried it mixed with corn and herb soup, tried corn and herb soups alone. They could eat nothing he prepared for them. When the gray daylight entered the room, he had tried everything possible and had failed. He sat wearily in his chair and watched them, defeated. They were no longer crying in their hunger, and when he touched them, they did not move as they had done before. They would be dead before the day was over, and the only chance men had ever had to have prowlers as their friends and allies would be gone. End of Episode 10.